Air from the pneumatic duct is used to power the air-driven starter, which is connected to the N2 rotor. The source of pneumatic air may be from a ground cart, the APU, or the other running engine. The engine start selectors control the start valves. Ignition and fuel flow are controlled through the fuel control switches. A maximum start limit line, red, is displayed on the EGT indication when the fuel control switch is moved to cutoff. Thus, this line is normally displayed after engine shutdown and until the engine is running. The line remains displayed after the fuel control switch is moved to run until the engine is stabilized at idle. The EGT indication changes color to red if the EGT start limit is reached during starting. Before start, the ignition selector is normally selected to the single position. In single, igniters 1 and 2 automatically cycle for each start for equal usage. The both position could be used, but only one igniter is normally used for ground start, while both igniters are used for in-flight starts. Pushing in and rotating the engine start selector to the ground position opens the start valve, engages the air-driven starter to the N2 rotor, and closes the engine bleed air valve if it is open. The engine start valve light illuminates briefly as the valve moves to the open position and then goes out. You will likely not notice this momentary illumination. However, if the start valve fails to open, the valve light will illuminate steady and the ICAS advisory message left or right engine starter will display. These same indications will also appear if the start valve fails to close when the start is complete. The pilot moves the fuel control switch to run when N2 is at 20%, or if 20% N2 is not possible, at maximum motoring and a minimum of 15% N2. Note, maximum motoring occurs when N2 accelerations is less than 1% in approximately 5 seconds. The fuel control switch opens the spar and engine fuel valves, allowing the fuel to flow to the fuel control unit, and also activates the selected ignition. The engine should light off and accelerate. At approximately 50% N2, the engine start selector snaps back to the auto position with an audible click. The start valve closes, indicated by the valve light briefly coming on, and the engine stabilizes at idle power. Thus, the starter automatically cuts out, and the start valve closes to stop airflow to the starter. This starter cutout allows the engine bleed valve to return to a position that agrees with the engine bleed air switch. As mentioned earlier, if the start valve fails to close automatically, the corresponding valve light will illuminate, and the ICAS caution message left or right starter cutout will display. In this non-normal situation, the engine start selector must be manually moved to the auto or off position to terminate starter operation. After start, if the start selector returned to auto, but the valve light is on and the starter cutout message is displayed, the start valve remains open. The non-normal procedure will instruct you to turn off bleed air pressure to the starter to allow it to close. After the bleed pressure is removed and the start valve has closed, the light and message go out. You will restore the bleeds and verify the start valve remains closed. As you can imagine, you should consult the company or procedures in this situation. Continuous operation of the starter must be limited in accordance with the starter duty cycles shown here. Normal duty cycle: 2 consecutive aborted starts with EGT cooling periods. After second consecutive cooling period, let N2 drop to 0 before re-engagement. Extended duty cycle: 0 to 5 minutes on, let N2 run down to 0 before re-engaging starter. 5 to 10 minutes on, followed by a 10-minute cooling period. 10 to 15 minutes maximum on, followed by a 15-minute cooling period. Do not re-engage the starter when above 20% N2. In-flight start envelope information is displayed in magenta on the ICAS primary display when an engine N2 is below idle, the respective fuel control switch is off, the respective engine fire switch is not pulled, and both ICAS primary and secondary displays are selected. The in-flight start envelope indicates the airspeed range necessary to ensure an in-flight start at the current flight level and 2 other lower flight levels in 2,000-foot intervals. Note: if the current flight level is above the maximum start altitude, the maximum start altitude and respective airspeed range are displayed. In addition, if the airspeed is below that recommended for a windmilling start, a crossbleed start indication appears above the N2 indication, and a fuel on command bug is displayed. Each engine has 2 igniters. One igniter is normally used for start. However, dual igniters are always used for in-flight starts.
The start selector also determines which igniters are used. With a start selector in ground, auto, or continuous, the single position of the ignition selector operates only one igniter. However, with the start selector in flight, both igniters on both engines are active, regardless of the position of the ignition selector.
An auto relight feature is installed. With the aircraft in flight or on the ground, the EEC will energize both igniters for the affected engine if the N2 speed drops below idle. This feature operates regardless of the positions of the ignition selector or start selectors. The ignition system is normally powered by main AC. Standby AC power provides a backup source. Therefore, ignition is always available for normal power or standby power situations. Now let's answer some questions about the start and ignition system.